So I just caught this movie on TV and felt like it might be good for my sanity if other people knew about it. Besides my mom and brother who I watched it with. It was on late at night on some obscure network I've never heard of. We stuck with it because the description sounded interesting. A classic horror movie actor, who is not Christopher Lee as I believed at first glance, dies, and soon after, his body is stolen by a group of obsessive horror fans. As you can imagine, this results in them unleashing his otherworldly wrath. Being an 80s horror film, and being called Frightmare, we expected cheese. But this movie is beyond that. This is one of the most baffling things I've ever seen. As we watched, we found that often, we weren't even making fun of it, just trying to understand whatever it was we had just seen. Before I get going, I have to be fair and mention that the version we saw on TV was heavily censored. Not only was the gore all blurred, many shots were missing altogether, and I was only able to see that when I downloaded the full version to show you these clips. So our first viewing of it was even more confusing than the movie already is, often omitting shots that were necessary to even be able to tell what was going on. While that's the impression it left on me, and I do think it made it funnier, I'm just noting that some of the things I was confused about on a first viewing may not actually be the movie's fault. Ferdy Mayne plays Conrad Radzov, or Razkov, or Ragzov, a classic horror movie actor. He's introduced as having a weirdly self-important perspective on his work, so much so that he treats every interaction with others as a manipulative performance, feeding into an ego so strong that he brazenly murders a director who was rude to him in his opening scene. He later suffers a heart attack at a film school speaking event, and is brought home to his mansion. From his deathbed, he begins planning his own funeral, calling it his last performance, and even calling in an old associate to direct it. Conrad dies during this conversation, and the director takes this moment to speak the truth, that he's glad the world is rid of such a vain, evil ghoul who— Psych! Acting! Die, General Burkhalter! Now, up to and including this point, I was unironically enjoying this movie. Mayne's performance is one where he could be saying or doing anything and it would be completely enthralling. He's just so much fun to watch. The story about this evil person externalizing the logic of classic horror films had me super interested to see where it would go. But what happens next is where this film jumps straight off the rails into Crazy Town and never looks back. Ever theatrical, he lets off one last wailing lean on the piano, before climbing straight into the coffin which was apparently already waiting in his bedroom, closing the lid himself with his cane, and this time, finally, actually dying. Cut straight to the funeral with audio from newscasters reporting his death. Now, the weirdness of his coffin literally being kept in line of sight of his deathbed can be attributed to his lifestyle, but consider what all this would look like to those not in the room. The loud blaring of a piano is heard, friends and family rush in and find the director, the last person to see this superstar alive, inexplicably dead on the now otherwise unoccupied bed, with the man himself now having sealed himself in his own coffin. That's the story! Not that he died, the absolutely bonkers, mysterious circumstances surrounding it, but it's just never mentioned by anyone. At the funeral, he appears in a video message addressing the guests in his Hollywood persona, noting that this is one of many pre-recorded messages he made in the event of his death. This will hilariously come back into play later. It's one of my favorite parts of the movie because we're seeing his public image of an eccentric yet gracious actor. A knowing nod to the cheesy films he starred in, Yet it's still presented in such a sinister fashion that he's somehow even scarier here than when he was casually killing people for disrespecting him. Finally, he's carted off to the grossly oversized mausoleum he had built and laid to rest. For a few hours. That night, some of the students from the event where he had his heart attack come by, and after getting weirdly into reciting some of his lines, decide to have a closer look. As they do, they discover the next of his messages, having apparently anticipated this eventuality and playfully messing with whoever would disturb him, which at this point feels very much in character for him. Having apparently not gotten their fill, though, they decide to invite their idol for dinner at a mansion that served as the set of some of his films, lifting the coffin as well, but kindly letting Conrad ride shotgun. I guess you gotta do what you gotta do, but from there they treat him with the utmost care and respect. Yeah, I'm starting to think they were hoping to be haunted. At the end of the night, they stash the stiff in the attic and head off to bed. The police discover that the body is missing, and his distraught widow consults the help of a medium to find out what's become of him. The medium suggests that the best course of action would be to ask the man himself. They perform a ritual, attempting to create a bridge from this world to the next, and unfortunately for everyone, they succeed. Conrad rises from his coffin and lets out an otherworldly howl that, to this film's credit, actually chilled me on a first viewing. His widow asks him where he is, and speaking through the medium, he tells them,
"You brought me back."
The widow then commands that he send those that took him to the same place, and thus the terror begins. Which is kind of funny if you think about it. I mean, how did she even know she could give such an order? Remember, they weren't trying to resurrect him. Heck, they don't even know they have resurrected him. All they're trying to do is essentially a paranormal Find My iPhone, but this lady's really determined to get her money's worth. Conrad, now a barely alive monster, begins hunting his prey. And I think this is where the movie runs into its biggest mistake. Up until this point, we've gotten to know him as a hammy, theatrical villain. But from this moment forward, he hardly says a word. This is probably meant to create a contrast and show just how torturous and unnatural his transformation is, but it's just really sad to see all that charisma be discarded, and the rest of the movie feels so much emptier as a result. As he roams the house, the soundtrack is a chorus of disjointed wails, screams, and miscellaneous horror sounds. It's goofy, yet still a little unnerving. An inexplicable fog follows him everywhere he goes, and the lighting and camera angles make it feel like a film from decades earlier, which is quite fitting given our antagonist. It's like he spends the first half of the movie pretending to be a horror movie monster, and the last half actually being one. At this point, it becomes a lot less interesting, though. More of a generic slasher with paranormal elements. Characters split off from the group, wander through a maze of build-up and fake-out scares, before finally being killed for real in a predictable ambush. Then we cut to the other characters reacting to the fact that they're gone, blaming the wind like Skyrim guards, rinse repeat. This kind of structure is why I've always found the actual rampage to be the least interesting part of slasher films. They're pretty much forced to discard the genuinely interesting or unique ideas that have been established for a parade of interchangeable scenes that all play out the exact same way. There are only two somewhat enjoyable aspects of these segments. The first is the paranormal nature of the kills themselves, which at least adds variety to the end of each of these scenes. even if they do all look a bit ridiculous. Perhaps intentionally so. I don't know why pretending to be Asian at people causes them to spontaneously combust, but it's pretty funny. The second are the shots of Conrad hunting during the kill scenes. It's kind of an odd choice for these moments to be shown so much from the killer's perspective, removing much of the tension they're normally designed to create. But they do evoke nostalgia for the classic horror films this one takes inspiration from, which does at least give it some sense of identity. Oh, remember before when I said these people have all the situational awareness of Skyrim guards? Well, get a load of this prime where'd they go dialogue.
They'll be back in a couple days.
Conrad seems to use his powers to get one of the students to enter his tomb. But this is the point where I had to wonder, where are they exactly? The way it's edited makes it seem like you can literally see the tomb from the back porch. But we saw them drive away with the corpse, and if it is that close, why haven't the police checked here? Anyway, once he enters, the door closes behind him, and another video message from Conrad begins playing. This time he taunts the trapped intruder with the knowledge that he's about to be killed by the deadly gas being pumped in. Okay, what? I get that the guy was a total nutjob who killed people even before he was a literal monster, but who built this for him? And for that matter, who helped him tape this message? Did they never raise any concerns over this? While this is all happening, he's still using his mind powers to do something. Even though the gas is physically installed in the building, so I don't know. Oh, and the guy's wearing a shirt for a termite exterminator service, so it's supposed to be ironic, I guess? This girl gets crushed by a levitating coffin, which she runs away from, and then doesn't. And then next generic horror scene, next goofy-looking paranormal kill. To its credit, I do really enjoy the 30s-inspired visuals here, with Conrad always appearing out of that ever-present fog, with a ghostly light emanating from within. I'm a broken record, but in my opinion, it's this clash of eras of horror filmmaking that gives this movie its right to exist, and a great example of how style and execution can add value to even a fairly bland script. Some of the kills are actually fairly gruesome, without necessarily being all that gory, but I have to once again point out that almost all the actual violence was censored or removed from the TV version. It was pretty funny seeing characters just kind of disappear from the plot after encountering Conrad like bad kids in Willy Wonka's factory. Though I suppose slasher films would be more fun if each victim got an Oompa Loompa song. This pretty much continues until we're down to the final two cast members, who have finally woken up to the fact that something is amiss. The final girl goes wandering while her boyfriend tries to start the car so they can leave, but she's cornered by Conrad in the attic. She decides she's gonna stand and fight, and oh wow, it worked. This shockingly simple solution actually stops his attack, and he just kind of makes a shocked face and lets her do it. This from the guy who can cause people to burst into flames by looking at them, or wander to their death by not looking at them. Well, anyway, she conveniently removes herself from the plot by passing out for no reason, while the boyfriend has the idea of bringing the body back to his tomb. By the way, it is hilarious seeing Conrad carried this way by someone who knows what he's capable of. But when he arrives, the door again closes behind him and boom, nerve gas double tap tape. It's really funny to me how much lazier this one is, consisting of a couple of lame jokes and ending the video with his signature ominous echo, only on a line that isn't all that ominous.
Don't breathe in those fumes. They're really nasty.
Just how many of these did he record? Conrad rises, and the boyfriend just kinda runs out, since for some reason the door isn't locked this time, and the chase is on. He collapses in exhaustion, and in an actually kinda neat moment, extends a hand up to an angel statue, and can't reach because it's missing its own hand, as the camera pans up to it, staring down at him sadly. This is followed by an amazing horror scene. He flees to a morgue full of the most improperly stored corpses in the world, where he's rendered unable to fight back in a moment that proves the whole stretchy eye thing was for fun and not actually part of Conrad's powers. After putting this guy into the crematory, Conrad seemingly considers his revenge to be complete. He presumably returns to his coffin and is rediscovered by authorities, which, how did he do that with cops swarming the house, but whatever, as the very next shot shows his wife and the medium visiting him in his crypt. The wife departs, and the medium attempts to loot his corpse. Given that she was the cause of everything that happened, I have no idea why she's surprised at what happens next. But it happens, and he's able to kill her without even having to sit up, which is what I want my retirement to be like. As this is happening, another tape begins playing, welcoming his victim to join him in the next world, as his wife shuts the door behind her, implying she knew this would happen. The film ends on one final tape, with Conrad saying,
Hell is not as bad as you think. It's actually quite pleasant.
and delivering a final message about respecting the dead. It actually comes off as super creepy when you consider that when he was first awoken, he seemed to have been in absolute agony. So that was Frightmare. And sure, it's cheesy, in simultaneously an 80s and 30s fashion. But I'd be lying if I said watching it one night with family after it randomly came on TV wasn't a really enjoyable experience. It's like a Universal monster movie using 80s slasher tropes in a self-aware fashion. I think it knows exactly what it's doing, and that my experience, watching and making fun of the absurdity, is precisely the intention. If it had gone the route of overt comedy, which a different director could have easily done with much the same script, I don't think it would have been as enjoyable. By shamelessly indulging in outdated but competently executed cliches, it creates an experience where you're enjoying the vibe even as you're laughing at the events. It's so predictable that I really don't think you're missing much by having it spoiled here, so I do recommend checking it out for yourself if you find this interesting. I'm sure there's explanations for certain things and plot elements that I missed, but honestly, on a first viewing, confusion was part of the fun.